They came across the icy sea in longships, fierce warriors from a land of sagas and gods. They were the first Europeans to reach the Americas, landing on its shores 500 years before Columbus. They built homes, hunted game, and even started to trade, but then, just as quickly as they arrived, they vanished. On the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, at a place we now call aux Meadows, the only proof of their great adventure sits silently in the earth. Archaeologists found the remains of their sod and timber houses, a forge where they hammered iron, and personal items like a bronze cloak pin and a bone needle, showing that both men and women lived here. Scientists even dated wood cut with their metal axes to a single specific year, 1021 AD. But the story the ground tells is a short one. The camp was only used for a decade or two before it was left behind, and it was left behind on purpose. The Vikings packed up all their valuable tools and sailed away, leaving only trash. Why? Why would these legendary explorers abandon a new world, a land they called Vinland, a place rich with everything they needed? What could have possibly happened here that was so terrible it forced them to give up on their American dream? To understand why they left, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the first time these two worlds met. The stories of these encounters, called Vinland sagas, were passed down for hundreds of years before being written down. They tell us that the first meeting was not peaceful. It began with Leif Erikson's brother, Thorvald. A few years after Leif discovered this new land, Thorvald sailed west with his own crew, setting up camp for the winter in the houses Leif had built. When spring came, Thorvald and his men explored the coastline. One day they came across 9 men sleeping under their canoes, which were made of animal skins. These were the native people of the land, people the Vikings would come to call Skraelings, a word that might have meant dried-skinned people because of the animal pelts they wore. Without any warning, Thorvald gave an order to attack. His men killed 8 of the sleeping natives. Only 1 managed to escape and run for help. This was the first act of violence, and it would set the stage for everything that followed. The man who escaped returned, but he was not alone. A large force of native warriors came back and attacked the Vikings. Arrows rained down on Thorvald's men. During the fight, an arrow shot past Thorvald's shield and struck him under the arm. The wound was fatal. He was buried right there, in the new world he had tried to claim. A few years later, another, much larger group of Vikings tried again. This expedition was led by a wealthy merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni. He was serious about starting a real colony. He brought 3 ships carrying more than 160 men and women, and even brought livestock like cattle. At first, things went differently. Thorfinn's group met the native people, who were described as having tangled hair and wide faces, and began to trade with them. The natives offered valuable animal furs. In return, the Vikings gave them strips of red cloth, which they loved. But what the natives wanted most was something they had never seen before: milk from the Vikings' cows. The sagas say that once they tasted it, they wanted to trade for nothing else. This peaceful moment of trade, however, may have hidden a terrible misunderstanding. The native people were very likely lactose intolerant, meaning their bodies could not digest milk. After drinking it, they would have become very sick. They would not have understood why. They might have thought the strange newcomers had given them poison. The very thing they traded for so eagerly could have been what convinced them that the Vikings were their enemies. A peace built on what might have been seen as poison was never going to last. The final break between the Vikings and the native peoples suddenly came. At Thorfinn's settlement, a bull that the Vikings had brought with them got loose and charged out of the woods. The natives, who had never seen an animal like this, were terrified. They ran to their boats and paddled away in fear. They came back a few days or weeks later, but this time they were ready for war. They arrived in a great number of canoes and attacked the small Viking settlement. The sagas describe them as using slings or catapults to launch a shower of projectiles at the Norsemen. One story even tells of a strange weapon, a large dark blue ball the size of a sheep's stomach that was lifted on a pole and thrown towards the Vikings, making a terrible noise as it landed. The Vikings fought back with their iron axes and swords, weapons the natives did not have, but it did not matter. There were simply too many of them. The Vikings were badly outnumbered. They were forced to retreat. In this moment of panic, one of the most famous and strangest events in the sagas happened. A woman named Freydis, who was Leif Erikson's half-sister and was pregnant, saw the Viking men running away. She became angry and shouted at them for fleeing from what she called pitiful wretches. She could not keep up with the men, so she grabbed a sword from a fallen Viking. Then she pulled open her dress, exposed one of her breasts, and slapped it with the flat side of the sword, all while screaming a war cry. This bizarre and terrifying act shocked the warriors. They stopped their attack and fled back to their canoes. Freydis' bravery may have saved the settlers that day, but the message was clear. 2 Vikings had been killed in the battle, and they knew more attacks would come. The sagas tell us that Thorfinn and his people came to a hard realization. They said that even though the land was good, their lives would be always dominated by battle and fear. They understood that they could never live in peace. This was a war they could not win. So Thorfinn Karlsefni gathered his people, abandoned the settlement, and sailed back to Greenland. The biggest and best attempt to build a Viking colony in America was over. The constant fighting was the reason the Vikings gave up on their American settlement. But the truth is, their dream was doomed for other reasons too. They were not just fighting the people of the New World, they were fighting against distance, against numbers, and even against the weather itself. The first problem was simple math. The Viking colony in Greenland, which was their home base for trips to America, was very small. It started with only a few hundred people and never grew to more than a few thousand. They did not have enough people to send to America to build and defend a new colony against the thousands of natives who already lived there. The second problem was distance. The journey from Norway to Iceland, then to Greenland, and finally to America was incredibly long and dangerous. The Greenland colony itself was not strong enough to support the new settlement in Vinland. It was like being at the very end of a long, thin rope that was already about to break. Greenland depended on ships from Europe to bring them important supplies like iron and wood, and Vinland was even farther away. Then, the world itself began to turn against them. The Vikings had arrived in America during a time called the medieval warming period, when the climate was warmer and there was less ice in the sea. This made sailing across the Atlantic easier, but around the 12th century, the weather started to get colder. This was the beginning of the Little Ice Age. Temperatures dropped, more ice filled the sea, blocking the shipping routes. Storms became frequent and dangerous. For the Vikings in Greenland, this was a disaster. The colder weather meant they could not grow enough hay to feed their animals in the long winters. Some studies show that the land became drier, which made farming even harder. The sea routes to Europe were often blocked by ice, so trade ships stopped coming. The Greenland colony slowly began to die. A weak and dying Greenland could not support a new colony in America. The battles in Vinland were like the first crack in a dam. The Little Ice Age was the flood that washed everything away. The Vikings did not just leave America. Their entire world in the North Atlantic was disappearing. The Vikings vanished from North America. Their houses at aux Meadows fell apart and were covered by grass, their story turning into a legend told in the sagas. For centuries, that is all it was, a story. But they did leave clues behind, like ghosts in the land. And as we have recently discovered, they even left a ghost in our DNA. The clearest clue is the settlement at aux Meadows itself. It's the only place in all of North America where we have found real proof of a Viking settlement. It is now protected as a special historic site for the whole world to see. We also know the Vikings traveled farther south because archaeologists found butternuts at the site, a type of nut that only grows in places like New Brunswick, hundreds of miles away. But there is another clue that is much more mysterious. In 1957, an amateur archaeologist was digging at an old Native American site in Maine, far south of Newfoundland. He found a small silver coin. Years later, experts realized it was a genuine Viking penny, made in Norway more than 900 years ago. How did it get there? Did Vikings sail all the way to Maine? Or was the coin traded from person to person, passed down through a huge Native American trade network, until it ended up on a beach in Maine? Some people even think it was a fake, planted there to trick everyone. To this day, nobody knows for sure. The most amazing clue of all, however, was not found in the dirt. It was found inside living people. In 2010, scientists studying the DNA of people in Iceland found something incredible. They discovered a special genetic marker in about 80 living Icelanders. This marker is passed down only from a mother to her children, and this specific marker is found almost nowhere else on Earth except in Native Americans. The science shows that this DNA first appeared in Iceland right around the year 1000, the exact time the Vikings were in America. The story this DNA tells is stunning. A Native American woman traveled from America all the way back to Iceland with the Vikings. We do not know her name or if she went as a wife or a captive. The sagas never mention her, but she had children in Iceland and her children had children. Her genetic signature, her legacy, is still alive today, a living link to that lost world of Vinland. The Vikings came, they fought, and they vanished, but their story lives on in these incredible clues. What do you think is the biggest reason they left? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed uncovering this lost chapter of history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another adventure into the past.